Jesus never said to go and find yourself. Instead, he said that we are to deny ourselves, which is one of the big problems because we tend to not deny ourselves and we're wanting to not give ourselves up in the search for ourselves. And there's one thing that it seems like it's true across the board. People who genuinely, and I mean genuinely love God, still feel like there's some distance. Maybe there's a little bit of a barrier, or their prayers aren't being heard, or they're not getting the direction that they really want. And what this video is all about is really focusing on that journey from self to source. Because when we are living as ourself, we're covering up everything, as we'll see in just a few minutes. Now, I want to be super clear. This is the way that I operate, the way that I function. I'm not saying at all that this is the way that it's laid out and the way that you've got to live. See, on my own personal journey, I was thinking, man, I'm not connecting with all of this separation. I feel like ourself, our soul, our spirit, our source are all created and connected. And as I began studying the word more and more, I realized, man, I've separated these out into different components instead of feeling the connection between them. So we're going to move from self to source. It means we're going to have less fear. There's less ego. There's less reaction. There's less illusion. So source ends up being experienced. Spirit flows freely. The soul becomes visible, not only to ourselves, but to other people. So denying yourself may have never meant that you're going to become less human. It may have meant that you're going to become more true. And isn't that really what we want more than anything else? To become true, because what happens? Jesus says the truth will do what? It sets you free. And so when we're free, we're really in our true essence. So we're going to return to who we really are, our soul, a journey beyond the self, what has been created and maintained by this world, from reaction to essence, to our core reality. When you look at someone like Christ, and I've got a ton of friends who are not Christian whatsoever, but they love Jesus. And I wonder why. And it because it's his essence, his vulnerability, his authenticity. He's functioning as a true soul, as a true essence. So we're going to move from self to soul because when our soul is present, we definitely sense spirit a lot more and we sense source a lot more. So we'll be step by stepping through every single piece of that. So the essence framework, there's source, there's spirit, there's soul, there's self. And we experience life through connection of all of these. Genesis 1:26 says, let us make man in our own image. And so the Elohim, God's, said, let's make man in our image. And that to me is source, shows up through a filling of the spirit, is created in our very soul and being. And then we've got this self as we navigate, or this ego as we navigate this world. So let's begin with source, the origin of everything. Yet for us, there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came. 1 Corinthians 8:6, or as a lot of people have memorized, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. From that same chapter, let's make man in our own image. So the source is not absent. It is the ground of being itself. So when it comes to source, when we're out in nature and we see all these things that have been created, we see the mountains, we see the trees, or we see other people, and we go, wow, there is a creator. It's what we feel in our being, right? So that's source. There's a source of all things that we recognize just in the day-to-day life. We may not always lean into it, but we recognize it and we sense it. And so the source is the origin of everything. Spirit, the divine presence within. The spirit is living within you, Romans 8:11. Spirit is the living connection between source and life. You remember when Jesus was talking to his disciples on the last night, and he said, the comforter's going to come. In other words, the spirit's going to come and going to guide you into all truth. We think of other passages that says that we're going to be led by the spirit. Well, that was always a little bit of tension for me because I didn't feel like I was being led by the spirit. I felt like I was able to come up with a lot of pretty good ideas. Some of those failed. And when I'm navigating my own life and trying to find my own direction, I would find that I would fail myself and kind of blow things up. relying on my own wisdom, but I always felt like, hey, I believe in God out there somewhere. And I know intellectually, I know that I've been given this promise of the Spirit that's supposed to be inside me. But I was in part of a fellowship that didn't really lean into that. Others of you are part of fellowships where the Spirit is like constant. Well, I wasn't raised around that. So I was really searching for the Spirit. And then I read more and more that Spirit is within you. It's within you. It's within you. It's within you. And so we're seeking to make sure that our self is pulling back enough for the Spirit to be present. And we'll hit that in a few minutes as well. And then our soul, our deepest essence. And Jesus said in Matthew 11:29, I am gentle and lowly in heart. You will find rest for your souls. What's he doing? He's indicating there's something beneath this self. There's this eternal essence, this eternal presence. So beneath our person, there is something that is deeper, and it's our soul. There's a lot of different belief systems out there about souls and where they originated, how they originated. Are they eternal? Are there ways that the soul can show up in our life through consciousness? There's so many of those different belief systems. And for me, it's to know that that's my true essence. When I am unconcerned and I'm at peace, when I'm joyful and pure joy, not just happiness, but joyful, when I'm loving, that I can tell when I'm centered. Yeah, there it is. There's my soul. There's my presence. And I think we've all experienced that to some extent and may not have called it that because we start looking around and trying to figure out, oh, wait a minute. What caused that? How did I end up feeling that? What triggered that? And we start trying to figure out if there were some steps that we took. And instead of just sitting back and relaxing into our soul or our spirit, we end up trying to figure out if we can manipulate it or we can cause it to happen again. So what is this change? Instead of realizing the soul is there all the time, we just tend to cover it up with us, with ourselves. And I don't mean that judgmental. I don't want anybody to think, oh man, he's trying to tear us down. Not at all. I instead want us to be awake to say, what am I doing to cover my soul up? What is creating this anxiousness about life and this frustration? And why am I not reacting with love and with joy and with peace? So we have to be considerate of all those things. And so then there's ourself, the constructed identity. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. So the self is conditioning, it's fear, it's ego, it's image, it's reactivity. It's all the things that we're trained to be in this world and on this planet. Listen, we've got to navigate the planet. We're biological. We have to eat food. We have to be around people. We enjoy community. There's a lot of different elements to this. So it's not as easy as thinking, well, I'm just going to live in soul all the time. There's still our self that is at work. And in some ways, our self can be pretty negative. We can have a negative ego. We can have a positive ego. But the real key is just knowing that this is a constructed identity and it can change. Personal growth is really about the self, right? Becoming better as a human being. There are those options that we continue to train ourself. And then we deny ourselves, say, I don't even know that person. In fact, it could be that we look back 10 years after spiritual growth and go, I don't even recognize that person. One of my good friends, one day I was mentioning something from about 5 years ago, and she goes, I don't know. I don't experience you that way. I don't experience you that way. Ourself is how people experience us to a large degree. What happens when they start experiencing our soul? It radically shifts it, doesn't it? So as our self begins to shrink, think about ourself being so big. Ourself is right in this image, or it's only ourself, right? That's the only thing that exists. So what if our self begins to shrink? So many people awaken first to the reality of something greater than themselves. We awaken to source. We awaken to God, and we realize, wait a minute, that was always there. So as self begins to shrink, source begins to show up and is already there. But our self had covered it up almost completely. Same is true with the spirit. The spirit emerges as our self shrinks even more. As we find that ourself, we've been this big, and we shrink and source shows up, and we shrink again and spirit shows up, then we realize that as self loosens, spirit begins to move more freely. We're getting out of the way. We're moving out of the way. And spirit starts moving. We start receiving more transmissions, more guidance, more direction. We start reading passages in the Bible and they're making sense like they never made before. Why? Because the Spirit's now able to move. I'm not trying to use my intellect to figure all this out. The Spirit begins to move. The divine presence becomes experiential. The divine presence becomes experiential. And then the soul becomes visible to us. So as we shrink even further beneath the conditioning, your deeper essence begins to emerge. As I start realizing that most of life in self, I've constructed, I was conditioned, I was programmed. Sometimes we use those words, and I hear this a lot in spiritual realms where people are acting like it was this evil conspiracy to develop us into this unawakened, unconscious human. There could be some of that going on, but for the most part, we're just living our lives. And we're taught to be selfish. We're taught to go after our goals, to reach our ambitious stretches in life, to become successful, to achieve greatness. And hear me, I'm not saying any of those things in and of themselves are wrong. They can be used in an incredible way through our soul. But when our soul becomes visible beneath the conditioning, the deeper essence begins to emerge. And the things that used to seem really important, you're like, man, I don't even matter anymore. The thing that used to aggravate you, unaffected. The person that used to grate on your nerves, you're glad to see them because it's an opportunity to share your light and your joy with them. So you begin responding instead of reacting. When we're reacting, what are we doing? It doesn't matter what's happening in life. We get very reactive. We get bothered. We get triggered. Somebody says something, boom, we're bouncing back on it. And then instead, when we're functioning within our soul and spirit and source, we're responding and we're sensing, in this moment, what's the best way to respond with this individual? How should I reach out? Ah, man, that person really got on my nerves. What are they crying out for? Maybe I need to come alongside with compassion instead of tension. Oh, we've got this recurring pattern in the family that doesn't seem to be altered. How could I be useful in that situation? So see, all of this begins to shift, right? And we begin to become very different in all of these ways. So when self is in the proper proportion, it doesn't mean that our self just is gone and we don't have any self whatsoever and that we've evaporated and now we are in some spiritual state in which we are navigating the world as the spiritualist and not being a materialist whatsoever, we end up not being quite as useful, honestly. So our self is still in existence, but it's extremely small. The self is no longer erased. It's not erased. It's just no longer ruling. It's not ruling our life. It's part of our life. You begin living from essence instead of reactivity. You begin living from essence, from soul, instead of from self. So, the journey overall. The goal is not self destruction. It's not to say I hate this ego, I'm getting rid of it. It's a process. It's a transformational process. It's a journey. So, it's not self destruction. The goal is to have less fear, it's to have less ego, at least less harmful ego, less reaction, less illusion, and our soul becomes visible and reliable and trustworthy. Spirit flows freely. We no longer feel like everything rests on us. We're getting information, we're getting direction, we're following doors that are opening, and source is experienced. You don't feel like there's a block between you and God. Source is everywhere. You're seeing the connections. You're seeing God in people. You're seeing source in nature. So everywhere you look, you realize this experience. So deny yourself. That's not to say, hey, you don't need to be human. It means that we need to become true, that we are being transformed, as scripture says, into the very image of Christ. And that essence, to me, is our soul. So our self shrinks, and as our self shrinks, source becomes more visible, spirit becomes more visible and active, our soul becomes more visible and active, our essence and our self, the things that we right now seem to be so focused on, become less and less and less important, and the actions that we take are more meaningful, and the lives around us are more blessed. Bible answers for real life. Now, again, let me tell you, all that's just me, what I just shared with you. You can disagree with it. You may have some other points of consideration. Put them in the comments below. If you've got a Bible question that's been on your mind, comment that below. We'll be doing a lot more episodes. I say we. There's no we. It's just, wait, there is. There is a we. There's self, soul, spirit, and source. We will be doing more Bible answers, and more than happy to answer any questions about the journey. Hope you have an incredible week. Hope as you open up the word that you receive insights like never before. And may you feel that your soul is leading the way through the spirit and connected to source. Be blessed.